This meeting is being recorded.
Good morning, everyone. We're just going to give everyone a couple minutes here to get logged in. It looks like it's moving up. Participants are joining, so give us a couple minutes and then we'll get started. We're just giving everyone one more minute. I did post the PowerPoint link for today's PowerPoint in the chat, and we'll repost that later again for anybody who joins after. So one more minute. All right, I think we're going to get started. So welcome everyone. We're so happy to have you here at today's Coffee Talk for June. We are going to have a presentation from our 4E staff here. So we're really excited to have them on here for this presentation today. So I'm going to have them introduce themselves in just a minute. I have just a couple of things I want to go over first. So a couple housekeeping items. Please keep yourselves on mute. I think when you come in, you're on mute, but sometimes those get turned off. Keep yourselves on mute just to keep the noise down a little bit. We're gonna post that link, and I've already posted it once, but I'll post it again, the PowerPoint link for today's presentation in the chat. We'll post that a couple of times probably throughout our training just to make sure everyone has access to it. It will also be posted out on the Training Academy link. Probably within a couple of days, usually that's out there. And then the recording, so the session is being recorded, will also be posted out on the Training Academy. And I'm going to post that link as well. So copy that. Let's see, we'll post that right in here. So this is the Child Welfare Training Academy, where we will also, oops, did it go on there? Yep, there it is. Where the recording will also show up. And that takes 7 to 10 days. I think that's right. For that to be posted out there. So that will be out there as well. What else? We want to do like a quick introduction for all our panelists that are on here. So I'm Marcia Riss. I am one of the child welfare subject matter experts in the business operations for SSIS. Molly, do you want to introduce yourself?
Good morning. Thanks, Marcia. I am Molly Kaler. I am one of the SSIS fiscal subject matter experts in the business operations area. Welcome, everyone.
Great. Thanks, Molly. How about Erica?
Good morning. Thanks, Marcia. I am Erica Jepson. I am the other child welfare subject matter expert with SSIS Business Ops. Thank you.
Heidi?
Good morning, everybody. This is Heidi Morris. I am the SSIS Mentor Program Coordinator. It's nice to have all of you here with us today. We're so happy that you could join us.
Thanks, Heidi. Shauna, I see that you joined. Can you introduce yourself? I think you're on mute there, Shauna. Well, I don't know if Shauna can hear us yet. So let's jump over to our 4E staff. If you guys want to each introduce yourselves. And then the only other thing I want to remind everyone is we will be taking questions as we go throughout before we jump into our 4E staff presentation. We'll be taking questions throughout. If you want to put that in chat, that will be recorded as well. And so we can kind of keep track, but we'll also watch the Q&A. So we'll, as we're able, we'll answer those things at the time that it's asked, but sometimes we might just answer, type those answers in or answer at the end for, if time is becoming a problem. So I will kick it off to, let's see, Debbie, do you want to start with introductions with your side?
Sure. I am Debbie Rederath, and I am the Title IV trainer for mostly Southeastern Minnesota. I have been doing this for the past 22 years. I'll move it on to my teammates. I see Paula right below me, so I'll let Paula.
Hello, I'm Paula Katzenmeyer, and I'm a Title IV trainer, typically Southwest region, but also covering part of the Northwest region right now because of a vacancy. And then also with me is our new Title IV policy specialist.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Brian Magruder. I'm in the role of a policy specialist with the 4E team. So welcome and thanks for joining us today.
Hi, I'm Deb Miller, and I am the Northern Regional Trainer for 4E.
Okay, this is Debbie again. Marcia, is there anything else that I need to bring up or before we get started here, or are we ready to roll?
I think that we're ready to roll. We can jump in if there's something that you guys think of otherwise, but I think it's all yours now. Thanks, Debbie.
Okay, well, just give me a second to get my screen sharing going. I am having a little screen sharing difficulty right now. So just bear with me here. All right, you should see the start of my presentation. Somebody interrupt me if we don't.
We do.
Okay, great. So what we're going to focus on today is more of the role between Title IV-E and SSIS and how those things work together to keep the program going and work most efficiently. So just a little bit about what is required, what is mandatory out there. And right now, SSIS entries are required so that we can have proper electronic communication between the two systems. And that is required due to some changes in federal law. It's not really an option for us, but we do have to do these electronic submissions and communicate in an electronic fashion. So if your agency is struggling with that or maybe not doing that properly, now would be a really good time to reach out to your EDT trainer to get working on how you can best communicate. There is also the income maintenance workers or Maxis workers, financial workers, whatever your agency may call them, should not be making changes to any Title IV-E activities inside Maxis without getting an SSIS referral. So those moving parts kind of make it all important that we are using the electronic systems. SSIS referrals need to come over within the first few days that a child is actually removed from the home and is in a foster care placement for several reasons. The first and probably the most important right now is to get that initiation of automatic health care. If you want more information on that, it's Bulletin 21-2101 about how we implement healthcare now for our children in out-of-home placement. And then the secondary or the second activity is to initiate the Title IV determination. We are required to make 4E determinations on all children who are under our authority for out-of-home care. Ongoingly, these SSIS referrals are made anytime SSIS is updated with data that we need for 4E purposes. Those would include things such as court orders, typically ones that have reasonable efforts to finalize permanency language, CHIPS adjudication dates. We're going to talk about why that is extremely important to make sure that information is being referred. And then when that continuous placement episode closes within SSIS, that closing needs to also head over to Maxis via the referral process. So in order to get SSIS ready to make a submission, there's a little minimum information that must be in there in addition to child data, work group data, that type of data. We need to have a continuous placement folder opened. We need the authority tab completed, and we're going to go over each of these. We have some slides and we're going to go over them in detail here in just a second. The placement tab, that's the one that tells us which foster home the child is in. Clearing to Swindex. That is kind of a back alley type of process that happens, but I do want to mention, Molly and I had a little bit of conversation recently about the issue with duplicate PMI numbers. And please be aware that that is still a problem, and we do still have duplicate PMI numbers that are causing issues, and they will cause issues with your interface record. Because the systems need to talk about the same child in the same continuous placement episode. So be cautious about PMI numbers. And of course, if you find duplicates, the lovely task of getting them merged and pared down to just one. And then court actions if the child is court ordered into out-of-home care. So those are the minimum preliminary items that need to be entered in order to get an SSIS referral to Maxis for a child that is in out-of-home care. So what you're looking at on the screen, and I apologize, it's small, but there's a lot of data in SSIS screens. What you're looking at here is the continuous placement folder and the data that belongs in the continuous placement folder. Important to make sure we have the correct supervising agency so we know who we're talking about. So that we have, if you have an agreement with your corrections, or if this is maybe a tribal child, we have that correct information on the continuous placement folder. The second part of that is the authority tab. And if you'll notice in the little pop-up down by the red arrow, we have voluntary, we have court ordered, we have protective hold, and we have court reviewed voluntary. Just want to point out and remember that ex parte orders are typically considered court orders as well. Anytime the court makes some type of finding, whether it be verbal on the record or reduced to paper. And it is very important that this continuous placement authority tab be accurate. It's very difficult for the systems to correct themselves if we miss a court action and we start our continuous placement with an incorrect court date. This is the placement tab. This is where we're identifying the foster home that the child is at and all of the relevant information about that. And then finally, the court actions area of SSIS. This is where there are a lot of areas and there's a lot of information out here. The most important thing to remember is that we have to be very cautious about the date we are using. Court actions are almost always entered the date of the court hearing. There are very, very few exceptions to using the court hearing date as the effective date of your disposition. It's also very nice from a 4E reviewer type perspective if the disposition area, which is that big white center box in the middle with lots of things to check, if that is actually updated accurately to show what we would find inside that court order, what happened in that hearing, it's not necessarily a good idea to just always check services or always check transfer of responsibility to the agency or case plan. Tell us what happened, especially the second one down, the adjudication of chips. If chips was adjudicated in an order, that is a pretty critical date. That's quite important. And any detail that can be given to us in this disposition area is extremely helpful. Then there's another tab on that court action, the child findings tab. And that is the one that communicates a lot with other areas in SSIS and then ultimately the income maintenance worker or the MAXIS side of things. The best interest statement date, again, that is usually the date the court hearing itself was held. That best interest statement date and the box right below it, the reasonable active effort statement dates, once the agency has obtained those judicial determinations, those dates on this child findings tab do not change. You can do one of two things. You can always put them back to the original best interest and reasonable efforts to prevent statement dates, or you can leave them blank as you are entering subsequent court actions after the initial removal order. The bottom one, reasonable efforts to finalize permanency plan, that has to do with ongoing judicial determinations, and we're going to talk about reasonable efforts to finalize permanency plan in a few more slides. So why are those dates so important in that child findings tab? Well, what happens is there is a lot of proofing messages that are tied to that court action child findings tab, in addition to issues inside the MAXIS system if those dates are not correct. So the first one that you're seeing here is the best interest statement date from MAXIS does not match SSIS. That will be a common occurrence if we are not making sure we're putting in the correct court actions, or if we are changing best interest statement dates on court actions. Typically, this proofing message will come out at some point in time. These don't automatically mean MAXIS is incorrect, so we do need to do some looking between the two systems to see which is the correct date and which system is not using that correct date. Another proofing message that's going to show up is this is related to that under Title 4E. It is mandatory that the best interest be on the original court ordered placement authority date. So you will see a message like this if we have an original court ordered placement date and the best interest statement date is not on that date or after. For children who are placed under a voluntary, best interest is required within 180 days of that placement. So this one you would see on a child who was under a voluntary placement agreement, but there has been no updated court action with a child's findings tab showing a best interest statement date within that 180-day window. And then this one, the reasonable efforts to finalize permanency plan is overdue. That is not a MAXIS error or proofing message. This is strictly related to the court actions child findings tab. We have not updated the reasonable efforts to finalize permanency. Typically, income maintenance and MAXIS will also not be updated correctly, but this particular proofing message is related to that court action child findings tab. On the MAXIS side, if MAXIS hasn't been doing their piece either timely or because of the COVID moratorium on no longer having to do reviews, that did not apply to Title 4E foster care children, but we have had to have a manual process for those income maintenance workers to do their foster care reviews. So some of them have slipped through the cracks despite our best efforts not to have them slip through the cracks. So you might be seeing these proofing messages a little more often. And it may very well be that during this COVID time period, a review has slipped through the cracks, but this is what you will see. This means the MAXIS side has not finished their review process. There's
Debbie,
also a second one.
Oh, Debbie, this is Molly. There's a question out on the Q&A.
Sure.
I was told, this is Michelle Granboys, hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I was told to change the RE date per court order if it is in the court order. I use the same best interest date on all court orders. Is that correct?
So by RE, I'm assuming she means reasonable efforts to prevent. And the reasonable efforts to prevent and the best interest statement dates, those are locked into when you first obtain them at the start of a continuous placement episode. The reasonable efforts to finalize permanency is a movable date, and that is one that you will update as we go into court and get permanency language. It is one area that Minnesota is always given big kudos over. We do a very good job of keeping our courts involved and keeping our courts updated as to what our permanency plan is. How are we getting these children out of foster care? That date is movable and should be updated every time a court order addresses reasonable efforts to finalize permanency. The reasonable efforts to prevent and the best interest is a one-time judicial finding. So those two do not need to be updated, even though it might be repeated in court orders for the entire placement time of the child. Molly, is that?
Yep, thank you. Michelle, if you have any further questions, if you want to just send it in the Q&A again, otherwise hopefully that answers your question. And then we have another question in the chat from Kathy Melvin. The bottom date on the court actions page, is that date of hearing or date the judge signs the order?
So on all of our action dates, we always use the hearing date. There are very, very few exceptions to not using a hearing date. So the typical rule of thumb is use the court hearing date, not judge's signature date.
Thank you, Debbie.
Okay, I'm gonna catch our slides back up here, so I apologize for scrolling through them quickly. Okay, on the final proving message, no 4E reimbursability from Maxis. This again is going to be a proofing message. You may see if the income maintenance worker hasn't processed the reviews like they need to. You do get pre-warned that there's something going on the Maxis side. So your income maintenance worker will greatly appreciate the heads up. They may not even know that they have missed a review just because of this COVID moratorium on doing case reviews. Okay, so where exactly is our Title IV eligibility information inside SSIS? So you will find it under the client eligibility log folder in the tree, and I'm going to explain what each of these folders are. The very top folder, the 4E eligibility folder, is where approval or denial information from Maxis will come back and land into SSIS for every continuous placement episode. The next folder, 4E reimbursability, that is where the income maintenance review of 4E reimbursability will come back for every single month a child is in out-of-home care. So if you have a kiddo in care for 10 years, you're going to have 120 potential data entries inside that 4E reimbursability folder. And we're going to go and show you what each of these folders look like here in just a couple minutes. The middle one, 4E foster care submission worksheet, that is the worksheet that needs to be filled out for every child entering out of home care. And we're going to go over this one as well. The 4E reimbursability submission worksheet, that is where we are sending judicial determinations of reasonable efforts to finalize permanency or possibly the CHIPS adjudication date. And then the bottom one, the foster care submission to Maxis, that is a summary of what you have entered into the foster care submission worksheet and the 4E reimbursability submission worksheet, and is the final step to getting something submitted to Maxis. So here we go. We'll look at each of those in detail and how we do it. So creating a referral is quite simple. You start with creating a foster care submission worksheet, create a new foster care submission, and then click the button Submit to Maxis. All of the data inside this foster care submission worksheet comes from other areas inside SSIS. So you are only going to get, for example, on the right-hand side of the screen, that is the actual submission worksheet, and you will see there is a drop down for petition filing date. It's only going to give you the options available for petition filing date or for court hearing dates. You can't add anything in here. You have to put it in SSIS elsewhere. I also want to point out, like down in the kind of in the center, there's areas for initially voluntarily placed children. So you can send over the best interest statement date once you get that, because we do have that 180-day window on a best interest determination. And then the bottom part of that screen, of that foster care submission worksheet, is some additional healthcare information that the systems are working on making that automatic MA process much simpler. So additional information and data is going to be transmitted between this interface record once that full healthcare functionality is up and running, which I believe is coming very soon, probably within the next month, if not sooner.
Debbie, can I just ask one question back to the orders and or hearing date? We have another question from Susan Sauls in the question and answer, just wondering if the judge's signature date should be used on TPR, TOC, or adoption orders.
So that would be the rare exception to that. And it all depends on the actual hearing itself. Did the court make its finding verbally in court that day? Did the court take it under advisement? So those are a little more difficult for us to just answer in a generic fashion. I would suggest you throw that one out to your EDT trainer, and we can guide you a little bit further on what would be the proper date in those situations, which is why I say typical rule of thumb. They may be the court hearing date, they might be the judge's signature date. It depends on what's inside that order and how that played out.
Thank you.
Okay, hearing nothing else right now, I'll keep going, but yes, just keep interrupting me and we'll get them answered. So what you're looking at here is the new foster care submission. This is the summary of what you have put in either into the foster care submission worksheet or the 4E reimbursability worksheet. And again, at the very top, you will see you'll have several options to show all of the submissions that were made for this particular case. So we can see what was submitted and why it was submitted and how it looks when it comes over to the Maxis side. You are picking this, excuse me, let me start over. This is grabbing the dates from the worksheets that you just completed. So all of the summary of everything lands in this foster care submission worksheet. And then you have one last step here. You must hit the submit this information to Maxis once you know this is what you want to send over. What happens then, and we're not going to go into the Maxis side at all, a whole lot, but just to show you your information that you submit or SSIS submits to Maxis ends up on a foster care referral report in the Maxis world. They receive information such as that PMI number, if there's one assigned, which again, back to what we talked about earlier, is something to keep an eye out for, is that SSIS and Maxis are using the same PMI number, gives the child's name, it gives a very important continuous placement ID number. SSIS and Maxis run a conversion process to come up with a continuous placement ID number, and this is where income maintenance gets it. It also tells them who the SSIS worker is, so they know if they have any questions. And then it gives them the referral reason. Why is this coming to us? And we'll go over some of these referral reasons in a few more slides for you. But this is what it looks like when it heads to the Maxis world. So why do you submit to Maxis? So on the Maxis side, it converts these things to a numeric reference. SSIS uses verbs and words. So in the Maxis world, they're going to get an O2 anytime a discharge from care is sent or a continuous placement episode ends. That's why it's critical that these also get sent. They're going to get an O3, which is sending best interest or reasonable efforts data. One thing to remember is that we want these referrals to go quickly as soon as a child is removed and the agency assumes placement authority. but sometimes you may or may not know if you have a best interest or reasonable efforts to prevent date. You can enter a court action, and actually should enter a court action, without having the physical court order in front of you. You can leave the best interest and reasonable efforts to prevent date blank. At least the referral will head to Maxis, and they can get started on the healthcare side, and they can get moving on things, and you can send that best interest and reasonable efforts to prevent date later. If you've made a mistake and you need to correct the data, they're going to get it as an 04. Although we EDTs will tell you, if you are sending corrected data, it might be a really good idea to call your income maintenance worker and talk about it, because sometimes sending corrected data can be a huge task to get corrected. So giving them a heads up that something was wrong might be helpful. They're going to get an 05 if you are just sending a reimbursability review. And a reimbursability review is considered a CHIPS adjudication date, or a reasonable efforts to finalize permanency date has been entered into SSIS. An 06 means an initial referral. Don't anybody ask why an 06 is not an 01, but an initial referral comes over to Maxis as an 06. An 07, maybe you made a submission and you realized you didn't really have legal authority. It wasn't, you don't want a submission to go. You can withdraw it so that they don't process it and work on it. If there's been a change in supervising agency between Human Services Corrections, a tribal agency, that's going to come to Maxis as an 08. And then the 09 is all about those foster care extension information. Those are for extended youth, that 18 to 21-year-old population. And data does still need to be exchanged about extended foster care youth. So once income maintenance does their thing and makes a Title IV-E determination, their determination will come back to SSIS and is going to land in that client eligibility log, that Title IV-E eligibility folder, that very top folder. This is why, kind of back to the beginning where we talked about, there isn't a need for paper referrals. There isn't a need to send emails saying I made my 4E decision. You can normally find it if you come back here to this 4E eligibility folder. And again, some reasons why you might not see something in this folder is probably going to be because income maintenance hasn't finished it. Maybe the PMI numbers do not match, or the continuous placement ID number might have an error in it. But otherwise, the data will come back and it will land in this 4E eligibility folder. If you are wondering why, say, a child was denied, the box right in the center, and I wish I had a pointer to send you to the right area, but the box right in the center tells the reason why a child might have failed a test on the Maxis side. If they did not meet the full AFDC program rules, this is where you're going to see why and what happened. So how often do you... Go ahead.
Sorry, Debbie. We have a couple questions in the Q&A. One from Kathy. She's wondering, they've been having an issue with submission not being received at discharge of care when the child is eligible. Is this a known issue?
No, not normally. It's probably an issue of the income maintenance worker may not know where to go to find it. There are several places inside Maxis where they can go and look for the latest interface submission records. So have your income maintenance worker reach out to one of the EDTs, because we can maybe show them some alternate ways to find interface records. It does land on what we call a DAIL record inside Maxis, but those DAIL records have been known to disappear if the Maxis does other work on the case without seeing that DAIL message. So there are some times when it may not be where they think they're looking for it, but it should still be out there on the interface record. So if you're having issues with it, bring it to us and we will do some research and make sure it's not an ongoing known issue, but at this point it is not a known issue.
All right, and then a question from Pam. When you are submitting to Maxis with an adjudication date, what reason do you use?
Okay, we're gonna get to that one.
Okay, and
Just
then
give us a second on that one.
And then another question, if the reimbursement dates are missed and not updated by the eligibility worker, does this affect the report?
It can. So you start getting a warning message at the 9-month mark that Maxis has not done their certification review. At the 12-month mark, it will actually start kicking out your payments. So you are warned that a certification review has been missed in Maxis at 9 months. So, and again, the poor income maintenance workers who have had to take manual reports from us on cases that need reviews because Maxis is not giving them the reviews properly like they're used to. So I suspect you will see more of that type of message as those start. You know, we're heading into our 3rd year, right, of having kind of a wonky review system for the income maintenance workers for our foster care children. So, but it can be corrected. They can fix it. They can go back and you can get them off your report and get claiming going like you're supposed to. So as soon as you notice there hasn't been a certification review, give your income maintenance worker a call because they'll appreciate it. They don't like missing them either, but it's kind of a backwards system right now for them. Does that help, Pam?
That was Tracy.
Oh, Tracy, sorry.
I maybe didn't say that. So, but that's all the questions we have now, Debbie. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to get to the CHIPS adjudication one here in just a second. So inside SSIS, anytime there's new 4E data available, and that includes reasonable efforts to finalize permanency and a CHIPS adjudication has happened, update your foster care submission worksheet, whatever's needed, create a new 4E reimbursability submission worksheet, do a new foster care submission using the submit reason reimbursability review. So there's your answer. If you are sending a CHIPS adjudication, it's part of the reimbursability review process. Now you can send it with any review, any submission you need, and the income maintenance worker will see that it's there. But typically it happens a couple months into your child protection case, and it's part of the reimbursability review. Access the action menu and remember to hit submit to Maxis. So here is the reimbursability submission worksheet, and this goes back to the CHIPS determination that we're talking about. This worksheet only has the data about reasonable efforts to finalize permanency, and that is the big white box on the bottom half of that. And if there were reasonable efforts to finalize permanency marked on a court actions child findings tab, that date would be displayed in this box. The other important part is that CHIPS determination date. And the reason why this is important is because the CHIPS determination date converts to what the feds refer to as the entered foster care date. Most of the time you would think little Johnny entered foster care last week, Tuesday, but that's not what it means. The entered foster care date from the federal level is a comparison of the CHIPS determination and the 4E removal date plus 60 days. So it's kind of a complicated, get your calendar out, count the math type of thing. But SSIS is programmed to count it perfectly for us if SSIS knows when CHIPS was adjudicated. So this is why we stress how important this is to update SSIS when CHIPS adjudication happens. So the bottom line, the big long one that says date child is considered to have entered foster care, and it says 11/26/21. In this case, because there is no CHIPS determination date updated, no yes or no, and no drop down date filled, SSIS is automatically adding 60 days to the continuous placement start date. So you're really helping out the math equation on the Maxis side if you do just update that CHIPS determination field as well and get that submitted to income maintenance as well. So the reasonable efforts to finalize permanency, what exactly is that? It is a judicial determination that the agency is acting reasonable efforts to finalize a permanency plan, whatever that plan is. So those permanency plans can be a variety of things: reunification, transfer of custody to a relative, there just has to be a door open to let the child leave foster care at some point in time. So the first one is due within 12 months of that date of entry into foster care. So that's why that CHIPS adjudication is so important. And then once we have that first one established, one is required under 4E purposes every 12 months thereafter. But again, like I said in the beginning, we get huge kudos because we have such good judicial oversight of our children in foster care. And we are going in and getting these reasonable efforts to finalize permanency much more often than federal Title 4E requirements. So every time we get a reasonable efforts to finalize permanency, it should be submitted to Maxis using the referral process. That just keeps everything flowing smoothly, and we're getting good credit for the good work that our agencies are doing for our kiddos that are in foster care. I'm going to pause for a second just in case somebody has a question out there. Okay, not hearing any. We'll keep going. So the reimbursability information that Maxis approves and submits over to Maxis lands in that second folder, the 4E reimbursability folder. And remember when I said if you had a child in care for 10 years, you would have 120 monthly reimbursement records. This is what it looks like. At the very top, you will have every single reimbursement year and month that is identified. So if you're having issues, maybe on your payment proofing side saying, why don't I have reimbursement records? What's going on? This will tell you why. And again, in that center box, there is reimbursable tests that need to be passed on the Maxis side. And you will see the popular reasons as to why reimbursement was denied on the Maxis side. Duplicate assistance, you're going to see when kiddos go home on a child home visit and the family unit accepts MFIP while the child's home on a child home visit. A maintenance agreement, probably won't see those. That would happen if your authority agreement with an outside agency ends. Reasonable efforts to prevent placement, you may or may not see that one. But the reasonable efforts to finalize permanency, that one you are probably going to see most often. And sometimes it's just plain and simple, a permanency order did not get submitted to Maxis or did not get submitted timely, and Maxis was not updated to show that you actually had permanency language like you were supposed to. So that's where you're going to find that information if you have a question about a particular month. Just make sure you're in the right month on the left-hand side of the very top. And you will see the tests that were either passed or failed that might be tripping up your payment reimbursement. So we talked a little bit about extension youth. We are seeing a lot more of extension youth proofing messages. They mostly have nothing to do with the Maxis side, but we are missing under the continuous placement authority tab, or excuse me, authority folder, we are missing the extension tab. And this is basically where SSIS is identifying what conditions our youth is meeting so they can continue in foster care through their 21st birthday. It used to be income maintenance tracked all of this. They were checking high school graduation dates. They were doing all of this. They don't do this anymore. It must come into SSIS under this continuous placement extension condition tab. There is also an extension review tab, and this one also seems to be getting missed as well, mostly because it just hasn't been updated timely. We typically find our workers are doing the work that they're supposed to be doing. They just aren't always updating the tabs like they're supposed to. So if you see those proofing messages about the extension review, that's what they mean. We need to go back to the continuous placement folders and get those extension tabs and those extension reviews updated properly. Here, I'm to the end. Here's our contact information for the 3 EDT trainers. Reach out to any one of us. We'll get you to the right area and get you moving forward. So I'll pause and see what we got for questions.
Hey, Debbie, there's a question from Clint. Do we need to submit new RE, reasonable efforts, to finalize permanency of the child youth if to finalize permanency of the child youth is already determined not 4E eligible?
You do not have to. But most, I believe Deb and Paula would agree as well. It's just a good habit to get into, to just always submit them, and then you're not trying to judge if they're 4E eligible or not. But it is not necessary for non-4E eligible children. It's still necessary in SSIS because you will get proofing messages about lacking a reasonable efforts to finalize permanency, but the Maxis side does not need to know that.
All right, then another question about extension review from Becky. If they change the condition, do they also need to do a review date, or will the new condition clear the message?
Nope, they would probably need to update their reviews. Extension reviews are due for youth every 6 months. So they would need to at least review that tab and make sure that they aren't, it isn't time for a new foster care extension review.
That is all the questions. Are there any other questions from people? There are a couple questions coming in. All right, here's a question from Janice. If a child is in placement with a non-licensed family member and are sent home on a trial home visit within a few days, can the child still be 4E eligible for those few days?
Yes, 4E should be determined. There's also, in addition to the actual maintenance cost reimbursement for 4E eligible children in licensed homes or approved homes, there's also that training and admin piece. And you continue to keep those children counted as 4E eligible for training and admin if they are on an authorized trial home visit as well.
Okay, here's another question. Under what circumstances could you use court-reviewed voluntary as the authority in the continuous placement folder?
That one is not used very often, but sometimes people will add a voluntary placement to start the continuous placement. And then when it does go to court, we'll use the court review to voluntary. There isn't a shift between, or a distinction between, a placement episode that starts as voluntary and moves on to court ordered. There used to be, but some agencies like to use that court review of a voluntary to just say, yep, we got our court review of a voluntary like we were supposed to, and put that in the authority tab as well. There should also be a corresponding court action for that court review of a voluntary. And that would have your best interest determination in it, or should have it.
Okay, here's another question from Janice. If a child goes into placement on a protective hold, but when they go to court are not court ordered into placement, do we still need to complete a 4E Maxis submission?
No. 4E determinations are made only for children who are under your authority. So a protective hold isn't your authority. So if they never go into foster care under the agency's legal authority for placement, there is no 4E determination necessary. There may be a need to get that healthcare going, and that may make things differently. And maybe Paula wants to chime in on the healthcare side of those types of situations.
Can you hear me? I think I'm unmuted now.
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, sorry. What was the question about the healthcare side of?
So for a kiddo who's taken under a protective hold, but it doesn't transfer into a agency authority for placement, they return home at the end of the protective hold.
Yeah, so
And the
as far
question
as
is healthcare required?
Yeah, as far as automatic MA, the new policy for automatic MA, the automatic MA starts the first of the month that the agency has responsibility for the placement and care of that child. So it would go back to the first of the month. So if the protective hold turned into a placement, then automatic MA would apply. But if it's only a protective hold and never a placement under your agency's authority, then it is classified as regular MA rules if the child needs health care during that 72-hour hold period.
Thank you, Paula. I thought that was the answer, but I wasn't confident in my knowledge. So thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, here is a question from Elizabeth. We have had our judge court ordering a child move from foster home to non-custodial parent. My understanding is that the continuous placement should close when with a parent. However, the worker is telling me we still have care, custody, and control and is reluctant to close the continuous placement.
So yeah, so that is a ongoing issue. We cannot have trial home visits with non-custodial parents. And so when a child returns to or goes to a non-custodial parent, they are no longer considered in foster care. And we can only have open continuous placement episodes for children in foster care. So that's kind of a bigger picture issue that our other half of our foster care team is working on getting some good guidance out there for agencies, because this is a struggle. The agency should not continue to have care, custody, and control of those situations as well. So keep your eyeball out for a little more information coming on how to handle these situations, so we start doing them consistently across the board here.
Debbie?
Yep.
Could I just add to that? There is a lot of good information in a fairly new AFCARS guide that came out late 2021. So that covers the placements with non-custodial parents as well as parents. So if you're unable to find that, reach out to to one of the trainers and we can point you in the right direction to that guide as well.
Okay, another question from Susan. I think I misunderstood something that was said earlier. We should be putting in the reasonable efforts to finalize date in the court action tabs every time it shows up in a quarter and do a submission to Maxis every time.
That's correct. And the reason for that is then it makes for a more seamless review process. Income maintenance workers aren't tracking down because somebody forgot to send one. It is only required for 4E purposes on an annual basis. But because we do it more often here in Minnesota, we are in court every 60, 90 days for most of our children. It just creates a seamless process. So for example, if you get a reasonable efforts to finalize permanency on April 15th, the next one is not due until April of 2023. But if you go in and get it again in June of 22, the next one is now due in June of 23. So it just kind of keeps that, ooh, we might lose our funding time period, just kind of kicking it down the road, and just kind of protects our money. And it's just a good habit to get into. You enter it into court actions, you submit it. Otherwise, you have to go look and see, oh, when was the last time I submitted a reasonable efforts to finalize permanency to Maxis? If you just do it every single time, Maxis should always have the latest and greatest information from you.
Susan just said in response to that answer, Debbie, that they have been told that doing that will mess things up for claiming 4E.
Not even a little bit will it mess up a claim. It will actually make your claiming easier, and you won't have a risk of having one kick out for not having a reasonable efforts to finalize permanency on the MAXA side.
Okay, any other questions coming? Yep, there are a couple more questions coming. Also, just so everybody knows, Marcia did put the link for the AFGAR's placement guide in the chat. That is really a great resource for entering placements into SSIS. Okay, Jen, another question from Janice. What is the difference between legal responsibility for placement to social service agency and transfer of legal custody to local social service agency?
No difference. I'm assuming they're talking about the disposition options under court actions, and there are multiples that look very similar. SSIS made the decision years ago to kind of recognize how every agency might call it different. They might use different terminology. So you will see, transfer of legal responsibility, custody to the agency. In the end, what you're looking for is, do you have the authority to remove that child, place them into foster care, and supervise that placement? What terminology your agency uses, that is up to your local, however you choose to use it. I'm assuming that that's what they were talking about. The disposition has a lot of options.
Yep, that is what they were talking about. Okay, any other questions or comments? Okay, not hearing anything. Anything else from any of the panel?
Debbie talking again, and you're all probably tired of listening to me, but if there's any issues you have about any of these things, we have everybody who's on here from the DHS side is really a great working team together. We work very closely with the SMEs and the SSIS. They work closely with us to try to minimize and identify things that might be tripping up the show me the money concept that we're all looking out for, as well as ease of how things operate. Paula, Deb, and I all work very closely with agencies who are maybe struggling with this communication piece. And that's what we're here for. We are here to help you guys in any way we can, make sure that you're all applying Title IV-E and foster care rules accurately and appropriately, and using our systems to maximize their maximize the services that they can give us and the things they can help us with. So do not feel like you're impositioning us or the SSIS side, help desk side, whatever. We do all end up on the same page for most of the cases and the clients that we look at. So that's what we're here for.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for attending. As Debbie said, always reach out to one of the trainers, or you can reach out to the help desk if you have any questions about anything related to SSIS or 4E. Marcia posted the link in the chat again, just where to find the PowerPoint and the recording for this coffee talk. It should be on that the Minnesota Child Welfare Training Academy page within 7 to 10 days. So thanks again for attending, and everybody have a great rest of your day.